Almost every UFC fighter gets a brutal injury that keeps them out for weeks, sometimes months, and maybe even years. But some fighters get really unlucky with injuries that put an early stop to their careers. So in today's video, we'll be going over the top 5 injuries that ended the careers of some really great UFC fighters. Don't go anywhere, because we're about to begin. Number 5 is Michael Bisping. If you're a new fan of the UFC, you might only know Michael Bisping for his commentary on UFC events and his regular YouTube sports analysis. However, Michael Bisping used to be one of the greatest fighters in the UFC. He's a former UFC middleweight champion and an all-time great in the promotion. But during the early days of his UFC career, he had a brutal injury that almost ended his career back then. It was back in 2013 when he faced the veteran Vitor Belfort on UFC Fight Night Belfort vs. Bisping. The fight ended in the second round after Vitor Belfort delivered a perfectly placed leg kick to Michael Bisping's right eye and subsequently rushed him on the ground with punches. After the fight, Michael Bisping's right eye got damaged from the effect of Belfort's leg kick. But somehow, Bisping managed to fight for a couple more years with a damaged eye. So competing essentially with one eye during the prime years of his career, Bisping had to change his fighting style to compensate for his visual impairment. Remarkably, he claimed 7 more victories, including an unforgettable win over Anderson Silva in London. Then, a first-round knockout of Luke Rockhold that saw him achieve his dream of becoming a UFC champion. However, after his tragic loss to one of the greatest ever, George St. Pierre, Michael Bisping's right eye got worse in his match against Kelvin Gastelum back in 2017. It was kinda like a moment of deja vu for Bisping, because Kelvin Gastelum defeated him in a somewhat similar fashion to how Belfort did, with the massive blows to his right eye area while he was on the ground. Michael Bisping eventually retired on May 28, 2018, and revealed during his appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience later in December 2018 that his retirement was majorly due to his right eye getting worse. Well, either way, this guy is still one of the greatest fighters of the modern UFC era and was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame back in 2019. Number 4 is TJ Dillashaw. Former 2-time bantamweight champion, TJ Dillashaw recently retired from the UFC following the brutal shoulder injury he suffered at UFC 280. This was Dillashaw's comeback fight for the bantamweight title against current champ Aljamain Sterling. According to Dillashaw himself, his shoulder popped out numerous times during training camp for the fight, but he still traveled across the globe to Abu Dhabi with confidence he could get the job done to become a 3-time champion. Unfortunately, his plans went up in flames quickly after his shoulder popped out in the first round against Sterling, which led to a second-round TKO loss and another shoulder surgery when he returned to the US. Dillashaw also admitted that his retirement was a conversation that he had with his wife prior to his last fight, but it wasn't a certainty. However, he's finally retired and has been removed from the active UFC roster. We all know how Dillashaw's career has swung from being extremely great to being not so great with his USADA suspension for doping. So the UFC 280 comeback was a way for Dillashaw to reclaim the title he never lost, and also win back the hearts of the fans. But he couldn't. And now, to make things kinda worse, he didn't want UFC fans to find out about his retirement just yet. But immediately after he notified the UFC of his plans to retire, the algorithm-based Twitter account UFC Roster Watch notified its followers of Dillashaw's removal from the active roster. But regardless of how the masses heard the news, the former champ seems to be comfortable in his decision for now. Number 3 is Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman is a former UFC middleweight champion and the man who put an end to the longest undefeated streak in UFC history held by Anderson Silva. Chris Weidman won the title, defeated Anderson Silva in their rematch, and went on to defeat the belt 2 more times before losing it to Luke Rockhold at UFC 194. But from there, Weidman's career crashed like a plane without a pilot, and we don't mean that in any way disrespectful, but we hope you get the point. He finally hit rock bottom after he broke his right leg during his fight against Uriah Hall at UFC 261. During the first few seconds of the first round, Weidman attempted a leg kick that got blocked by Uriah Hall, leading to the gruesome leg injury. Obviously, this leg injury meant Weidman couldn't compete in the fight anymore. He has been out of competition since then and has undergone surgery on the right leg. The truth is, we're not certain whether or not Weidman would ever return, even though it does seem very likely. But if he does come back, he'll have a lot of work to do, especially because his current UFC record isn't so flashy. We know how Dana White and his board are quick to release fighters on a bad record. and right now, Weidman only has 2 wins in his last 8 appearances, so we guarantee he'll definitely be under the UFC's release radar. Number 2 is Cain Velasquez. The most popular modern example of an MMA career cut short due to injury is Cain Velasquez, a 2-time UFC heavyweight champion. Like, we need you to understand that at the height of his career, Cain Velasquez seemed unstoppable. Cardio Cain was the heavyweight champion of the UFC and had a skill set that no one could deal with. However, he was also injury prone. The injuries kept him away from the octagon for 2 years, and upon his return, he faced interim heavyweight champion Fabricio Werdum. Velasquez lost the bout in shocking fashion after getting caught in a guillotine choke while shooting for a takedown. The promotion hoped to book a rematch between the two men, but Velasquez's injury made it impossible. The former heavyweight title holder opted to recover, returning a year later. He then defeated Travis Brown, and the UFC made another attempt at scheduling a rematch between him and Vi Cavallo. However, the NCAC declared him unfit to compete due to the presence of bone spurs on his back. Velasquez took another sabbatical, returning 3 years later. Unfortunately, his return came against Francis Ngannou, who only needed 26 seconds to KO him. So after an illustrious career that was more than hampered by injuries, the former heavyweight champion announced his retirement from the sport. Number 1 is Anderson Silva. For a man who made a career out of crafting spectacular highlight reel knockouts and unforgettable moments inside the cage, anytime Anderson Silva fought, something about it was worth watching. After ruling the UFC middleweight division for a total of 2,457 days, the highest by any MMA fighter in the history of the sport, Anderson Silva's reign came to an end due to probably the biggest mistake of his career. As was quite typical of Anderson Silva back then, he was showboating in his fight against Chris Weidman. This wasn't necessarily a problem, because Anderson Silva did the same thing in almost all of his fights. However, Chris Weidman saw an opening in Silva's game, and boom! He landed a punch that sent Silva's consciousness flying out of the octagon and his body crashing to the ground. Now, this wasn't the real problem. The real problem came in their rematch when Anderson Silva suffered a career-ending injury and his chance to reclaim the UFC middleweight title and avenge his loss. Neither the viewing public nor the former middleweight champion himself will be able to forget the nature of how his highly anticipated rematch with Chris Weidman came to an end. It was an abrupt, unfortunate, and ultimately painful end to the fight for the man regarded as the greatest fighter of all time. Anderson the Spider Silva threw a left leg kick early in the second round that resulted in a severe break in his lower leg upon being checked by the undefeated champion. The fight was immediately waved off, and Silva was tended to inside the octagon, which included his broken tibia and fibula being set on site by the cage-side physician. This injury was so bad, Anderson Silva actually considered quitting MMA. He did leave the sport for almost 2 years, but when he came back, things weren't the same anymore. He got bounced around by other new age fighters like Israel Adesanya, Jared Cannonier, Uriah Hall, and Daniel Cormier. The UFC eventually released Anderson Silva on November 19, 2020, leading him to start a new career in boxing. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time. Bye!